야, 나 다양한 생각들 참에 뭐, 음, 다시 한번 리지 개발의 수야인다.
Next, I would like to speak about the eighth good deed.
다 리지 개발이 가르쳐야 되고 그랬잖아.
Now, the eighth good deed is how he practiced the path of the middling individual. And the verse reads, "Until we fully cross the ocean of birth and death, nor in the three realms are pleasures and riches permanent. I wondered, when will I be liberate forever all being throughout space from the three realms of samsara? I think of this as one of my good deeds." So now in Mikyo Dorje's own Instructions on Training and the Liberation story of Mikyo Dorje, to discuss in brief, it says in above, when he'd been speaking about the path of karmic cause and effect, which is the path of the lesser type of individual properly practicing the karmic cause and effect. And so when you're practicing karma, cause and effect, then what's most important is that you avoid harming other sentient beings. But when you say you're not harming sentient beings, not harming other sentient beings, but just merely not inflicting harm on them in the short term, does that mean that that other sentient being is free from harm or liberated from harm? It does not mean that. And this is because that other sentient beings in their own continuum, there's a lot, they have all the karma, the causes, the karma and afflictions. And also the other sentient beings with whom they have karmic connections and who would harm them. And so they're infinite other sentient beings with whom they're connected through karmic cause and effect. And what is the root of harming other sentient beings? We need to give that up. Now, the basis of causing harm depends upon karma and afflictions. Now, afflictions are the motivation, right? The actual action is the misdeeds that we do. The actual karma is the misdeeds. So if we do not do bad karma, then even if all the sentient beings in samsara were to come together and try to harm us, then they would not be able to harm us. And if we do not do any action that would lead to rebirth in the lower realms or in samsara, then no other sentient being could throw us into samsara or cast us down into the lower realms. And so the one who actually really harms us, the ultimately harms us, is the view of the self and the other afflictions in our own beings. There is no other greater harm than that. That is the fundamental harm or the fundamental cause of our harm. But up until now, we haven't seen the afflictions such as the view of the self as being enemies or as being the cause of harm. And instead, we have thought about them as being on our side. Particularly our ego can be thought as being our own side and as our advisors. And that's how we think of them. And so that the thought of clinging to a self and of cherishing ourselves, because of that, we have accumulated many misdeeds and non-virtues. And so in past lives, we have done everything that could possibly have been done. So if we think about even any one sentient being, Mm. No, so, for example, like there's the think about the destruction of the earth at the end of an eon by either by fire or by water. This can destroy all the sentient beings. This can destroy all the possessions in the three world, but it cannot stop the continuum of our beings. So for that, what we need to do to stop that sequence of being reborn in samsara because of karma inflictions is we need to train in the methods and the prajna that can free us from that. And what that method is to do the practice of doing what we should do and avoiding what we should not do according to the four truths. So just as saying we need to identify what karma is and we should view as suffering, the truth of suffering as being an illness, the truth of origin as being like a cause of illness. So we need to, and similarly, we need to know what we need to take up and what we need to give up in the four noble truths. And where is this taught? This is taught in the Dharma teachings of the Buddha, of the three vehicles and of the sutras and the tantras. And so it is absolutely indispensable for us to practice these. And while we're practicing them, we shouldn't just say, oh, I'm practicing them, have a mere understanding them. We need to have an actual experience or feeling from practicing them. For example, if a poisonous snake would suddenly get into your neck, you'd immediately cry out and throw it away, right? Similarly, we should see the afflictions within our being as being like poisonous snakes and think how can we get away from them? And we have to have that sort of intention and that sort of diligence. And we have to have a strong feeling that we need to be like this. And so this is what it says in Mikkyö Dorje's instructions in training in the liberation stories of Mikkyö Dorje. No, Mikkyö Dorje himself did this in his actual practice. And how do we know this is that when some people would say to him sometimes, oh, someone died. Some person maybe named Tashi died. And after they died, he was probably freed from the lower realms and has probably achieved the level of a universal emperor. And so people would come and say this to him, right? Oh, someone, my relative died, and they went to some sort of a guru or who did divinations or astrologers, and they'd say, I have a lot of love for my relative, but when they died, so I have a lot of worries about where did they die. So where did they die? Please tell me where they died, where they were reborn. So please tell me where they've been reborn. And suddenly the guru would pretend to have some clairvoyant powers and kind of close their eyes. Recite a few tens of thousands of monies and make some and you give me some offerings and I'll let you know. And then they say, oh, no problem, they say. Then a few later, I said, and they'd come back, they'd go back and say, I've done everything you asked now. They said, now if they still want to get a little more, they'd say, it's still not quite. You need to give me a little bit more. You need to give me a little bit more, is what they'd say. And if they think that there's not much, and think that there's some sort of a bigger response we need to get, you say, oh, there's no problem at all. Nope, nothing. Is it free of the lower realms? And it's been reborn near the god Indra, or it's been born a lotus in the realm of Sukhavati, or something like that. And when they say that, and so when people would come and tell this to Mikkyö Dorje, but when they'd say that, then Mikkyö Dorje would say, if we are unable to completely eliminate the pernicious illness of a view of the self, the liberation of being freed from the lower realms for a birth or two and achieving the pleasures for Buddha and achieving the samsaric pleasures and wealth are not enough. It is not an, and so also when you'd actually see someone who is afflicted from hunger or is suffering somewhere of hunger, when you'd see someone who had nothing to eat and nothing, no clothes to wear, no shoes for their feet, no hat for their head. And when he saw people in such a desperate situations, or when he'd hear about them, he would really worry about it deeply, as just as if it were happening to himself. Later, when you'd hear that the person was now in the situation a bit better now, then at that point, it is a little bit freed from that at the time being. But does that count as real liberation? They will have the bad. They will have to experience the results of their even worse, even stronger karma than that, and experience endless ocean of suffering in the lower realms and so forth. And so, so you get like a real sort of on an illness where he would like be so worried that he'd get dizzy and unable to think clearly. Now, sometimes Mikadoroje would ask about the person and said, "How are things going for that person? Did things turn out well? Have you heard anything about them?" He would ask. When he'd ask about them, in those days, it wasn't like today, and you wouldn't hear news immediately. When they say there's no news, so we don't really know it, or we don't sense it when all other sentient beings sink into the ocean of of suffering, do we? Or he would say, until they're liberated forever from samsara, then no matter what we do, it's not really going to help. But it isn't that. But sometimes it wasn't as if he was like afraid of the suffering of samsara and feeling as if it had nothing to do. It's like that he just didn't know what he could do to help other sentient beings. It wasn't like that at all. He was afraid of samsara, and he had a very strong feeling that he had a great feeling of fear of the suffering for himself. And he also couldn't bear the thought of other sentient beings experiencing the suffering of samsara. But sometimes when you have a thought like that and you see a really bad situation, sometimes you have nothing to do, you have a lot of fear, you don't know what to do, and you're unable, you don't know where you should go, you aren't able to sleep at night, and your food loses all flavor. That's what happens to us. But it wasn't like that for Mikyo Dorje. Instead, what happened? He said, the way to free yourself from the suffering is what the Buddha taught. And so he'd study that. And the method was practicing the Four Truths. And the prajna would hear the prajna of realizing the two types of selflessness. So with those two, the prajna and method, whatever practice when he would begin, he would study, he would practice, and day and night he would work hard in order to really habituate himself to this. So he was extremely diligent. And he would also tell people, you should practice the Four Noble Truths in this way. Some people would say that some people say like they don't have a lot of merit in this lifetime. They don't have a good house, and they always have like leaks in their house and things like that. Things aren't working out. Or they might have a nice house or a nice car, and then it always breaks down. Or in their family, they always have they always have problems in their lifetime. So these are people who in Tibetan we always say they lack merit. So there's people like that. And when people are suffering, people are unable to, and so there are also people who also are unable to unbear their suffering, and they'll even kill themselves, right? And so if we practice the Dharma, if we're practicing the Dharma merely to be happy in this lifetime, or they understand practicing Dharma is to bring happiness in this lifetime and to be free of suffering in this lifetime. And so this engine, so they go to see some lamas, and some people would say, there's no problem about the suffering of samsara, because everything that arises is the Dharmakaya. Everything that arises is the display of the Dharmakaya. So just rest within these confused appearances as they are, without being distracted, and it'll work out. And so rest in the confused appearance themselves, and everything will work out. You don't need to worry about anything. Just sit there. Some people speak like this. And some people, what they say is, they just aren't satisfied. That's not, if there's no, that's like kind of ridiculous. I mean, that's not okay. So for this lifetime, I need to do, they try to do something to do a little bit of listening, contemplating, and meditation. But they do that in order to gain happiness and pleasure in this lifetime. So if you look at it on the outside, it looks at that they have, like their desires as intense as a fire to practice listening, contemplation, and meditation. But in actuality, that's they're really only doing it for the sake of listening, contemplating, and meditation. But that listening, contemplating, and meditation would then be pointless. And the reason for that is when you practice the listening, contemplation, and meditation in Dharma, is in order to achieve liberation in the state of Buddhahood, not for the state of this lifetime. And so for this reason, there's no need to do there's no need to do study and to listen, contemplate, and meditate on the Dharma for the sake of this life. There are many other things you can do. And so Mikyo Dorje himself would never do such actions himself. So that is a brief description of how Mikyo Dorje practiced the path of the middling type of the individual. Now, with the great individual, there's a lot about the great individual. So the rest of this text is all about the path of the great individual. So we've got up to the 8th grade here. Now from the 9th, and then from now on, these are all about the practice of the path of the greater type of individual. So if we just take a look at those. So now, I don't think I can teach the entire text this year, the entire text, the autobiographical versus good years this year. The reason for this is that as I teach them, I need to give a bit of explanation to them. If I just read them, then there's no point to it. So at the beginning, I give a lot of explanation. At the end, I don't give an explanation. I just read them as fast as I can. There's no point. So at some point, we're going to have to. So at the beginning, if you, so I think it's not good to start out and being really doing as much as you can at the beginning, and then kind of just blowing it off at the end. That's not good. So I'll teach as much as I can, and then in the future, next year, I will continue the teaching. If I just try really hard, then it will not be for my health, and the teachings and what I say will not be as good. And so today, we've had a lot of discussion about meat in the 7th and 8th good deeds. Mikyo Dorje often prohibited the eating meat. Now, Mikyo Dorje himself, as I mentioned the other day, I've explained this already. There are many reasons for stopping to eat meat. Now, from one perspective, is that in the Kaju Great Encampment, during the times of the during the previous Karmapas, the meat and alcohol were not allowed to be brought into the great encampment. And when I speak about the Kaju Great Encampment, I'll speak about that in more detail. So in the past, there's already a tradition of not using, not taking meat and alcohol. And so I think that's one reason why he's prevented the eating meat. And also when Mikha Dorje, when he was young, he was given the title and put on the throne as a Karmapa, but he did not have a lot of control or a lot of freedom, as I've mentioned before. And so all the power was in the hands of the leaders of the encampment, of the people below him. And so it's, and then they all and the power actually all ended up in one of their wives' hands. And so at that point they did whatever they had. Then what happened? So then all the animals that were offered to the encampment were killed, and their flesh was eaten. Also, Mikha Dorje, when he was young, people came and talked to him. So we need to have ganachakras, and we have a ganachakra. You have to have meat and alcohol, right? And so how is it if we each have a big piece of mutton? And Mikha Dorje said, "Oh, that doesn't work at all. You can't eat the mutton during that." So from the time that he was young, even when he was at a very young age, Mikha Dorje people in the encampment did not respect the previous traditions of the encampment and would have meat and alcohol. And in particular, they'd eat meat without any restraint. And so when Mikha Dorje himself got a bit of influence and a bit of control, he made a rule that they were not allowed to eat meat at all. It's a very strict rule. Likewise, many of you in the Shadows have read his Mikha Dorje's commentary on the Vinaya, the orb of the sun. For example, when he said, even when we do the Mahakala pujas at the end of the year, we cannot include meat in those offerings. So he speaks about this very clearly there. So not only did he prohibit meat in the great encampment, Mikha Dorje also encouraged everyone and all over Tibet to become vegetarians. And when we look at the index of his collected works, what it says, there is advice on to the people of Tibet how it is inappropriate to eat the meat of those who lack of the defensive animals. But now these texts are ones that we do not have, so we can't get them. I hope that we can get these soon, and if we can, then there'll be something we can speak about. In any case, Mikha Dorje prohibited meat within the encampment, and also advised everyone in Tibet that it's encouraged everyone in Tibet strongly that they should be a vegetarian and give up eating meat. And so I thought I would speak about that in the next day or two when I speak about the great encampment. And when we speak about Mikha Dorje, and we speak about all these life stories, we always talk about the great encampment. But since we don't have a great encampment, we kind of wonder, what was the great encampment like? We kind of have some doubt or some suspicions about this. And we can't get a mental image of what the picture of it in our mind, or what was the great encampment like. And so for that reason, I've been saying I'll be teaching about the great encampment, but teaching about the great encampment is not so easy because the events with the great encampment, the situation is not contained all in one text. It's in one text. It's they're a little bit in many different texts and the different life stories and stuff. Then to gather it all together, it's not so easy. But I thought maybe I'll try tomorrow. If I don't teach about the great encampment tomorrow, tomorrow, then it's probably to say that I'm not human, then I'm a dog. So I have to give myself a bit of push. And if I don't push myself, then I'm not going to say anything at all. And so tomorrow I thought I'd probably speak about um, the Great Encampment, but I'm not sure if I can meet all of your expectations in teaching about the Great Encampment. Now, the reason for speaking about the Great Encampment is that, from one perspective, it is related to the activities and life story of Mikhail Dorje, so we have to speak about it. And from another perspective, we need to know what are the reasons why the Great Encampment was first formed. How is it that it continued, and how it flourished in the middle, and then when we understand this, I think we'll understand better what Mikhail Dorje's intentions and what his actions are. And so I think we have no choice but to speak about the Great Encampment tomorrow. And so that's it for today. And now we'll recite the prayers.